Millionaire finds out his maid is protecting her special child, and he can't believe his eyes. Hi, I'm John Parker, and today's story will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give your like, it means so much to me, and leave in the comments which city or country you are listening from. Those were the exact words running through the mind of Richard Whitmore, a wealthy businessman from Charleston, South Carolina, as he froze in the doorway of his own mansion. What he witnessed in that instant would forever change the way he saw loyalty, sacrifice, and family. Now, let me take you back to the moment where it all began. Richard Whitmore was known across the Carolinas not just for his immense fortune, but also for the cold precision with which he handled life. A man of investments, properties, and high-profile connections, Richard's reputation was flawless. But behind the marble walls of his estate, there was another world entirely, one filled with secrets his wealth couldn't control. It was a crisp autumn morning when Richard's world cracked open. He had returned earlier than expected from a business trip to Atlanta. As his polished shoes echoed against the marble floor of his expansive foyer, he followed the faint sound of muffled cries. They weren't the cries of distress that echoed through the halls when staff quarreled or when a dish broke. No, these were the aching sobs of a child. Turning the corner, he saw his maid, Evelyn Carter, clutching a little girl in her arms. The child's face, round and angelic, was streaked with tears. Her eyes, deep, soulful, and innocent, betrayed something different. And in that moment, Richard realized the girl had Down syndrome. Evelyn, always discreet, always dutiful, was not merely a maid scrubbing his silverware and polishing the oak banisters. She was a mother, and she was hiding a secret within his very house. "Please, Emily, don't cry," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking with both love and fear. The girl buried her face against her mother's shoulder, trembling. Richard felt a strange tightening in his chest. He had expected betrayal, theft, or even laziness from his staff at times, but never this. Never the sight of a mother protecting her child as though the entire world were against them. He took a step forward, his shadow stretching into the room. Evelyn turned abruptly, her eyes widening in horror as she realized she had been caught. The porcelain vase in her hands moments earlier slipped from her grip, shattering on the floor with a sharp crack. "Mr. Whitmore," she gasped, struggling to find words. Her lips trembled, but her arms did not falter. They only held Emily tighter. Richard's eyes burned with 1,000 unspoken questions. Why had she hidden the child? What secret forced her to bring her daughter into this house in silence, tucked away from everyone's knowledge? And most importantly, what did this mean for him? A man who believed control was everything. The power dynamic between employer and employee shattered in that moment. Evelyn was no longer just a maid. She was a woman standing at the edge of desperation, willing to risk everything to protect her special child. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sobs of Emily and the beating of Richard's heart. For the first time in years, the millionaire wasn't calculating profits or transactions. He was staring at a truth rawer than any balance sheet could ever reveal. "Tell me the truth, Evelyn," Richard finally said, his voice stern but unsteady. Why have you been hiding her here?" Evelyn's lips parted, but no answer came out. Only tears streamed down her cheeks. Emily clung tighter, whispering something so soft Richard barely caught it. "Mommy, don't let them take me." In that fragile plea, Richard felt his world tilt. He could no longer pretend this was just a matter of staff disobedience. There was something deeper, darker, and far more personal hiding in the shadows of his home, and as Evelyn finally drew in a shaky breath to speak, Richard braced himself, because he knew instinctively that the secret she carried would not only test his morals, but would unravel the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and betrayal. What Evelyn confessed next would leave him stunned beyond words. Evelyn Carter stood frozen, her hands trembling as they clutched Emily tighter. The silence pressed down like a weight on her chest, and Richard's piercing gaze made it impossible to hide any longer. The truth, the one she had buried for years beneath humility and quiet servitude, was clawing its way out. "Mr. Whitmore," she finally whispered, her voice fragile but resolute. "I had no choice. If anyone knew about Emily, they would have taken her from me." Richard's brow furrowed, confusion clouding his stern expression. "Taken her? Evelyn, what are you talking about?" And so, with tears streaking her weary face, Evelyn began to unravel the story she had carried in silence. Evelyn wasn't always a maid in Charleston. She had once lived in Greenville, a smaller town where gossip traveled faster than the wind. She had fallen in love with a man named Thomas Givens, a factory worker who promised her forever but delivered nothing but heartbreak. When Evelyn discovered she was pregnant, Thomas disappeared, leaving her with nothing but bills, judgmental stares, and the ache of betrayal. When Emily was born, it was both the greatest blessing and the greatest trial of her life. Evelyn knew something was different the moment she held her daughter's tiny hand. Doctors confirmed it days later. Emily had Down syndrome. Instead of compassion, Evelyn faced whispers of pity and cruelty. Some neighbors told her she should place Emily in a home, that a woman like her couldn't raise a special child alone. But Evelyn was made of stronger stuff than they realized. She swore that no matter the sacrifice, no matter the pain, she would never abandon her daughter. Still, reality was unkind. Jobs were scarce, and money was tighter than ever. Each month became a battle. Rent overdue, utility bills threatening to shut off, cupboards nearly bare. Evelyn worked cleaning houses by day and sewing at night, yet it was never enough. One bitter winter, the social services threatened to intervene. They said Evelyn's living conditions were unfit for a child with special needs. The words echoed like a death sentence. Fear consumed her. She imagined strangers tearing Emily from her arms, placing her in a cold institution, stripping away the only love the child had ever known. It was then Evelyn made the hardest decision of her life, to leave Greenville behind. With nothing but a small suitcase, her daughter in tow, and a borrowed bus ticket, she traveled to Charleston in search of anonymity and survival. That's when she found the Whitmore estate. The mansion loomed like a fortress, pristine and intimidating. She had begged for work at the servants' entrance, her voice shaking, Emily hidden beneath a blanket in her arms. By some twist of fate, or perhaps divine mercy, the head housekeeper had given her a chance, but there was one condition: no distractions, no complications. Mr. Whitmore runs a tight household. Terrified of losing the job, Evelyn kept Emily a secret. By day, she scrubbed floors, polished crystal, and served guests as though her heart weren't aching with worry. By night, she tucked her daughter into a small cot hidden in the storage room behind the laundry, whispering bedtime stories. To drown out the creaks of the mansion, for months nobody knew. Evelyn lived in constant fear, glancing over her shoulder, praying Emily's laughter wouldn't echo down the hall, and somehow she managed to keep the secret. Until today, until Richard had returned home early and caught a glimpse of the truth. Richard listened, his stern face unreadable, yet something stirred behind his eyes. He was a man used to control, to contracts and rules. But Evelyn's story didn't fit into the neat columns of a ledger. It was raw, human, and painfully unjust. "So you've been hiding her under my roof all this time?" he asked slowly, disbelief sharpening each word. "Yes," Evelyn admitted, her voice breaking. "Because if I lost this job, I'd lose her too, and she's all I have. My Emily is my whole world." Emily, still clinging to her mother, peeked up with tear-streaked cheeks. Her small voice broke the silence. "Please, sir, don't be mad at Mommy." Richard felt a pang in his chest. The innocence in that child's voice was unlike anything he had known in years of cutthroat boardroom battles. For the first time in decades, the millionaire businessman felt powerless, not because of a rival or a bad investment, but because of a child's plea. And yet, just as Richard's hardened heart began to soften, another voice shattered the fragile moment. It was Margaret Whitmore, Richard's estranged wife, who appeared in the doorway, her icy glare fixed on Evelyn. "So this is the secret?" Margaret spat, her voice laced with venom. "The maid has been smuggling her burden into my house?" Evelyn froze, fear tightening around her throat. Margaret's cruelty was infamous, her disdain for the staff well known. Richard turned sharply, his eyes narrowing at his wife, but Margaret wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her finger jabbing the air at Evelyn. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. You and your little secret." Her words dripped with malice, and in that instant, Evelyn realized that the greatest threat to her daughter might not be the law, or poverty, or fate itself. It might be the very woman who now stood before her, ready to destroy everything. And that was when Evelyn understood. Her fight to protect Emily had only just begun. The threat in Margaret's voice lingered like smoke in the room, and Evelyn felt it sting her lungs. She shifted Emily to her other hip, trying to steady the child's breathing, while the millionaire stood between two currents he could no longer control, his wife's fury and the maid's trembling love. "Put the child down," Margaret snapped, every syllable a blade. "And gather your things. You're finished here." Richard's jaw tightened. "No," he said, the word landing heavier than marble. "No one is finished until I understand exactly what's going on." Margaret's icy smile didn't reach her eyes. "What's going on is simple. The maid smuggled a child into our home and lied to everyone. Do you want the board to hear this at the Whitmore Foundation Gala on Friday? A charitable event with sponsors from King Street to Hilton Head, while your housekeeper runs a secret. Nursery in the laundry room." Emily flinched at the sharpness in Margaret's tone. She pressed her small palm against Evelyn's cheek as if to shield her. Evelyn whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart," though fear rattled behind the words. Delilah Brooks, the head housekeeper, arrived breathless at the threshold, apron crumpled from hurried steps. "Sir, ma'am, I heard raised voices." Her eyes fell on Emily, then darted to Evelyn with a flicker of guilt. "Mr. Whitmore, Margaret pounced. "You knew." Delilah swallowed. "I suspected. I heard a lullaby some nights. You are my sunshine." It echoed through the vents. She looked at Richard. "I made a choice, sir. I chose mercy. The child is harmless." "Mercy?" Margaret hissed. "Or betrayal?" Richard cut in, voice low. "Enough." He motioned them toward the breakfast room, where morning light spilled over a long oak table set with white china and a pitcher of sweet tea, Charleston hospitality trapped inside a storm. He gestured for Evelyn to sit, but she remained standing, clutching Emily like a shield. "Evelyn," he said gentler now, "you work hard. No one disputes that. But this house has rules, insurance, liability, things I cannot ignore. Why didn't you come to me?" "I didn't believe a millionaire would hear a maid," she answered, a simple sentence that cracked something in him. "And I couldn't risk the child." Margaret pressed her thumbnail into the rim of a teacup, porcelain squeaking. "You couldn't risk the child? You risked everything, and you risked us." She flicked a glance at Richard. "You think the foundation's donors will keep writing checks when they hear your staff lives like stowaways? Your reputation is our currency." "A child is not contraband," Richard said. "Then treat this like a business decision." Margaret shot back. "Call the authorities. Let the state take it from here." Evelyn's arms tightened around Emily. The little girl murmured, "Please don't let them take me," and began to hum that soft southern lullaby through her tears. The sound floated across the room and snagged on Richard's memory. His sister's voice, once upon a July afternoon on Sullivan's Island, singing the same tune to a baby he never met. The memory hovered and then vanished before he could hold it. He pulled out his phone, not to dial, but to buy time. "Caleb," he said when his family attorney answered. "Hypothetical question. A domestic employee brings a child into a residence without permission. Any immediate criminal exposure?" On speaker, the lawyer's voice was dry as parchment. "Not necessarily criminal, but you've got employment policy violations, potential insurance breaches. If the child has special needs, the Department of Social Services may assert interest. The quickest way to mitigate risk is transparency. And documentation." Margaret leaned forward, pouncing on the word. "DSS, exactly." She ended the call with a tap before Richard could object, and began dialing another number from memory. "Charleston County DSS. I'm connected there from the foundation. I'll fast-track this." Evelyn's breath left her. "Please," she said, not to Margaret but to the room itself, to fate. "Please don't punish Emily for my choices." Delilah moved closer, soft but steady. "Ma'am," she said to Margaret, "there's more humanity in this laundry room than I've seen at those galas with their pressed linens and silent auctions." Margaret's laugh was brittle. "Spare me the sermon, Delilah. This is not church. This is about order." Richard looked at the child, then at Evelyn, the maid whose hands were cracked from bleach and soap, whose love was the kind that doesn't make speeches because it is busy surviving. He felt the weight of family secrets he'd locked away, the ghost of lullabies, the ache where pride used to sit comfortably. "No one is taking her today," he said quietly. "If DSS comes, we talk. But no one uproots a child on my doorstep in the middle of the morning." Margaret's eyes flashed, a spark before the blaze. "You would defy me for a maid? I would defy fear," he answered, "and cruelty." Before another word could splinter the table, the house intercom crackled. Cole Addison, head of security, spoke from the front gate. "Mr. Whitmore, Charleston County DSS is here. And there's a second visitor you'll want to know about. Says she used to work for your family." Richard exchanged a puzzled glance with Delilah. "Who?" "Name's Lydia Moore," Cole said. "Claims she was a nanny for your late sister before she passed." The room tilted. Richard hadn't heard Lydia's name in years. Summer afternoons, the smell of magnolias, and his sister's. Laughter flickered like film behind his eyes. Margaret stiffened. She knew that name too. Evelyn looked from one to the other, reading a history she didn't understand. "Bring them to the parlor," Richard said. Minutes later, a woman in her early 60s stepped through the doorway with the careful composure of someone who has learned to move gently in other people's grief. Lydia Moore wore a navy blazer and carried a slim leather folder. A DSS social worker stood beside her, badge visible, professional and watchful. Lydia's eyes went first to Emily. The child had pressed her cheek against her mother's shoulder again, hiccuping the last of her cries. Lydia's face altered, surprise, melting into recognition, then into something like sorrowful wonder. "Sir," Lydia said softly to Richard, "forgive me for coming unannounced. When DSS called, they mentioned a child, a bracelet, a lullaby. I asked to accompany them because I thought it couldn't be. But now I see." Evelyn clutched instinctively at Emily's wrist, where a thin silver bracelet peeked out from the cuff of the little red dress. It was simple, a small charm in the shape of a crescent and palmetto, the South Carolina emblem, dented with age, polished by love. Margaret scoffed. "A trinket proves nothing." Lydia opened her folder, slid out an old photograph, and set it on the oak table. In the faded picture, a baby with round, luminous eyes slept against a young mother's chest. On the baby's wrist, the same bracelet. In the corner, a handwritten note, "For my sunshine, June 12th. Delilah brought a hand to her mouth. "Richard." reached for the photo as if it might vanish. He recognized the handwriting. It was his sister's. The social worker cleared her throat. Careful, procedural. "I'm Ms. Alvarez with Charleston County DSS. We're here to ensure the child's safety and verify guardianship. Ms. Carter, may we speak privately after?" Evelyn nodded, voice gone. Lydia's gaze didn't leave Emily. "I kept that bracelet's twin a long time," she murmured. "Your sister asked me to—" "Your sister, sir. She said it would help us find our way back if the worst ever happened." She looked up, and her eyes were steady. "And the worst did happen." Margaret bristled. "This is absurd. We are allowing a Maid story and an ex-nanny's nostalgia to rewrite reality." She turned to Miss Alvarez. "This child is not our responsibility." The social worker's tone stayed neutral. "Our only concern today is the child's welfare." Richard's voice came rough. "What are you saying, Lydia?" Lydia drew a breath that seemed to carry an entire decade. "I'm saying the lullaby is not a coincidence." She tapped the photograph. "I'm saying there are family secrets none of us wanted to reopen." Her eyes flicked to Evelyn, compassionate, apologetic. "And I'm saying this little girl might not be as far from your blood as you think." Silence fell, thicker, heavier, alive. Evelyn swayed as if the floor had shifted under her shoes. Emily traced the curve of the bracelet with a fingertip, calm now, as if her body recognized a room that had finally spoken its true name. Margaret shook her head, rejecting the gravity. No, absolutely not." But Lydia's hand didn't waver as she laid a second photograph on the table. Another crescent, another baby, another June, and with that single, fragile proof, the millionaire understood that the Maid's secret was not merely about survival. It was a key turned inside the oldest door of his own house. A door about to swing wide. Richard stared at the photographs laid before him as though they were evidence from a forgotten trial. His chest rose and fell, uneven, the room spinning with memories he had buried. The handwriting was his sister's, Grace Whitmore, vibrant and wild, who had vanished from the family orbit years before her untimely death. He remembered her laughter on the piers of Sullivan's Island, her insistence that family meant more than money, her whispers of rebellion against the rigid Whitmore legacy. And now, staring back at him through the years, was a bracelet and a child's face that carried echoes of Grace's own. Margaret slammed her palm on the oak table. "This is manipulation, convenient stories and faded photographs. I will not have our lives derailed by a maid's sob story and a nanny's ghost tales." Lydia Moore's calm didn't falter. "With respect, Ma'am, I was there. Grace entrusted me with those bracelets before Emily was ever born. She feared what would happen if her choices clashed with your reputation, Richard. She said, 'Blood doesn't always come home the way we expect. Promise me you'll protect whatever comes.'" Richard's voice cracked, almost inaudible. "I remember." He clenched his fists, shaking off the memory before it could consume him. Evelyn's knees threatened to buckle. Are you saying Emily has Whitmore blood?" Margaret let out a bitter laugh. "Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. This is a ploy for money. Evelyn wants to tie herself to this family name to secure her place here. Can't you see it?" But Richard wasn't listening to his wife anymore. His gaze was fixed on Emily, who now sat quietly on her mother's lap, small fingers tracing the charm on her bracelet. Something in the curve of her eyes, the soft shape of her cheeks, whispered to him of Grace. And then came the lullaby, hummed so softly it seemed to rise from Emily's very soul. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The same song Grace had sung endlessly on summer nights, strumming her guitar beneath the porch lights. The same song Richard had tried to forget when she disappeared into her choices, leaving him to carry the Whitmore name alone. The walls of the Whitmore mansion, pristine and suffocating, seemed to close in on him. He no longer saw Evelyn as a servant or even as a mother clutching her child. He saw her as a guardian of something far more dangerous, a living truth that could dismantle his carefully constructed world. Ms. Alvarez, the DSS social worker, adjusted her glasses, her tone professional but waited. Mr. Whitmore will need to verify documentation, birth certificates, medical records, any legal guardianship papers. Until then, the child cannot be removed from her mother. But if there are questions of paternity or lineage, those must be addressed legally. Evelyn's voice quivered. Emily is mine. Mine alone. I don't need your name or your money or your family's shadow. I just need her safe. Richard turned toward her sharply. But safety may depend on truth, Evelyn, and truth has a way of demanding witnesses. The room simmered with conflict. Margaret's fury, Evelyn's desperation, Lydia's quiet certainty, and Richard's unraveling composure. Outside, the late morning sun cut through the blinds, slicing the room into strips of light and shadow, as if the house itself were undecided which side to take. Delilah, the housekeeper who had silently hovered, finally spoke, her southern drawl thick with conviction. Sir, I've worked for you 23 years. I've polished your silver, set your table, guarded your secrets tighter than your safe. But there's something you ought to know. Secrets like these, they don't stay buried, they rot. And when they rise, they tear families apart. You best face it now before it consumes all of us. Margaret spun on her. You dare lecture me? But Richard raised his hand, silencing them both. Enough. I need proof. I need to know, once and for all, if she carries Whitmore blood. The words hung heavy, heavier than contracts, heavier than vows. Evelyn's eyes widened, horror flooding her. No, I won't let you use her like a specimen. She is a child, not your experiment. Richard's jaw set. Then tell me the truth. Did Grace ever meet you, Evelyn? Did she ever cross your path? Evelyn hesitated, her breath catching. The answer she had held back for years pressed at her lips, fighting for air. Emily clutched her tighter, sensing the storm in her mother's chest. Margaret's smirk widened. See, she hesitates, lies unravel with silence. But before Evelyn could respond, Lydia stepped forward, her voice breaking. Grace did meet her. I introduced them, years ago, before Grace disappeared. Evelyn was working at a diner on Meeting Street. Grace trusted her. She said Evelyn had the kind of courage she didn't. The revelation exploded like glass shattering across the table. Richard's head snapped toward Evelyn, the weight of recognition dawning. Evelyn whispered, almost too softly to hear, Grace begged me to protect what she couldn't, and I swore I would. Silence. The kind of silence that rearranges lives. Margaret staggered back, eyes narrowing with panic. No, this cannot be true. If it is, everything we've built, everything we own, could be at risk. Do you hear me, Richard? The Whitmore fortune, the foundation, our name. But Richard wasn't listening. His eyes were on Emily, who, unaware of the storm raging around her, leaned into her mother's chest and whispered, Mommy, sing it again. And Evelyn, with trembling lips and defiant heart, began to sing the lullaby Grace once sang. You are my sunshine. The melody wrapped around the room like a haunting confession, forcing everyone to hear what words alone could not prove. And in that fragile moment, Richard realized that the child's existence was not just Evelyn's secret. It was the Whitmore family's reckoning, waiting decades to be revealed. The mansion grew quiet after the lullaby, but the silence felt like a verdict deferred. Richard stepped away from the table and told Cole to keep the gate closed to reporters and curious neighbors. Then he turned to Lydia. Show me where Grace went in those last months, he said. Every diner, every church, every borrowed and couch. If there's a thread left in this city, I'm going to pull it. Charleston's late afternoon light rolled over the live oaks as Richard's town car drifted down Meeting Street. Lydia rode beside him, hands folded over that slim leather folder as if it were a reliquary. "Your sister loved this part of town," she said, pointing past wrought-iron balconies and window boxes overflowing with jasmine. Said the air felt less judgmental near the water. They stopped at Pearl's Diner, a narrow counter spot, with checkered floors and a chalkboard menu that still listed shrimp and grits at yesterday's price. A brass bell announced them. Behind the counter, Pearl Washington, grey braids swinging like a metronome, stared for a beat and then broke into a knowing half-smile. "Lydia Moore," Pearl said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Been a minute, and you must be a Whitmore. You wear that name like a stiff collar." She poured 2 sweet teas without asking, set them down, and lowered her voice. Grace used to tuck herself in that corner booth. Brought a young server with brave eyes, a girl named Evelyn. Taught her how to count tips like blessings. Richard leaned forward, the millionaire stripped down to a brother hunting for the pieces of a story. "Miss Washington, did my sister leave anything here?" Pearl nodded toward the back. "Told me once, if I don't make it home, give this to my brother. He'll know what to do when pride stops being useful. I kept it because around here, we keep what matters." She returned with a small brown envelope, edges softened by time. On the front, in Grace's looping hand, "For Richard." He opened it at the counter, palms oddly unsteady. Inside, a letter, a safe deposit key stamped First Federal, Broadcinty, and a Polaroid. Grace cradling a newborn on the steps of Roper St. Francis, June heat shimmering in the frame. A tiny wrist gleamed. With a crescent and palmetto charm, Richard read the letter in silence. Lydia watched the muscles in his jaw slacken, then harden. When he finally spoke, his voice had the gravel of a man standing in front of a long overdue truth. She writes that she named the child Emmeline June, after summer, after hope, he said. She was scared of the Whitmore machine, boards, bylaws, reputation. She wanted me to find the woman with courage, if anything happened. Her name is Evelyn Carter, he read, throat tight. If my child cannot be with me, she should be with her. Not for money, for love. The diner. Clatter went soft around them. Lydia exhaled a prayer under her breath, the kind that never quite leaves the lungs. "Family secrets," Pearl murmured, eyes wet. "They'll sour sweet tea if you let them sit. Best to sip them fast and decide who you are." Back at the Whitmore estate, Margaret did not intend to sip anything. She moved through the kitchen like a draft of cold air, phone pressed to her ear. "Harrison, it's Margaret," she said to a board member at the Whitmore Foundation. "I need a statement drafted, clean phrases about integrity, policy, the importance of protecting vulnerable children. And call Lockwood and Brandt. The crisis, he firm. We'll pre-frame this, a breach of trust by a maid, a millionaire family taking the responsible path." She hung up and dialed again. "Judge Klein, Margaret Whitmore, we support your scholarship fund every fall. I need guidance on a temporary protective order, purely procedural, so the child can be placed with a vetted facility while we sort out the family narrative. The DSS contact here is Ms. Alvarez, but I'd like this to move with clarity." When she ended the call, Cole was in the doorway, cap in hand. "Ma'am, the social worker left a safety plan request. No removal. She said there's no neglect. They'll schedule a home visit with the mother present." Margaret's smile was all enamel. "Then schedule something else. I want every surveillance clip from the past 90 days, entry logs, after-hours movement, any footage that shows the maid in restricted areas. We will demonstrate a pattern, Mr. Addison." Cole hesitated. "With respect, Mrs. Whitmore, the child looked safe. Whatever this is, DSS isn't a broom to sweep your foyer." Her pupils narrowed. "You work for the Whitmores," she said, and left the room, sandals cutting sharp beats against imported tile. On Broad Street, a banker escorted Richard and Lydia into a quiet room and slid open a safe deposit drawer. Inside lay a neat archive of a life Grace had tried to secure against her own storms. a copy of a birth record with the middle name June, a folded notarized letter titled Temporary Guardianship Intent, naming Evelyn Carter as custodian in the event of medical incapacity or death. There was also a sealed lab envelope from a genetics clinic in Savannah, dated years ago. Richard stared at it, thumb brushing the flap but not tearing it. He chose the letter instead. As he read, his expression changed, something like awe braided. With shame, she trusted Evelyn, he said. She trusted a Maid more than the Whitmore name. Said the nanny. He glanced at Lydia. The nanny knows why. She saw who showed up and who didn't. Lydia nodded, eyes shining. Your sister knew love rarely files its paperwork on time. But it shows up, sir. Every day it shows up. Richard slipped the key and documents into his jacket. This isn't about inheritance, he said, more to himself than to her. It's about redemption and about finally ending a cycle of betrayal we dressed up as tradition. His phone vibrated. A text from Cole. Mrs. W. asking for clips to build risk case. Also, a black SUV from Palmetto Private Security just pinged our perimeter. No drop-off listed. Thought you should know. Richard's pulse hitched. He typed back, no one moves the child. Stall if you must. I'm on my way. At the mansion, Evelyn. Sat at the edge of the laundry room, the hum of machines and a scent of lemon cleaner wrapping a trembling piece around her. Emily traced bubbles in a plastic tub and giggled when the suds crowned her fingers. Mommy, look, a cloud, Emily said, lifting a foam halo. Her joy lit the dim space. Delilah perched on a stool, mending a ripped apron with neat, patient stitches. When my boys were little, she said softly, we made castles out of cardboard boxes and called them kingdoms. Didn't need marble to feel rich. Evelyn smiled through tears. Kingdoms built on love, not money. She kissed Emily's damp hair. We're okay, baby. We're okay right now. From the doorway, Ms. Alvarez reappeared with a clipboard. Ms. Carter, I'm drafting a plan. You'll remain on site temporarily. We'll schedule a formal evaluation of services, speech therapy, occupational therapy, whatever Emily needs. My recommendation is no removal, but I'll need cooperation. You have it, Evelyn said. Every bit. A shadow slipped across the hall. Margaret. She didn't step in. She watched, studied the mother and child the way one studies a chessboard when the opponent begins to see patterns. Richard's car fishtailed slightly on wet cobbles as he turned into the drive. He found Margaret in the parlor, phone glowing. In her palm. Call off the SUV, he said without greeting. What SUV? Her lashes rose in mock surprise. The one idling 2 streets over with Palmetto Private Security plastered on its insurance forms. They don't move a child without an order, but they sure can stage a violation before DSS returns. He stepped closer. You do that, you don't just fight me, you fight who I'm finally becoming. Spare me the sermon, Margaret said, echoing Delilah's earlier line with ice. I am protecting the Whitmore name. From what? Richard's voice dropped. From the possibility that family is larger than our letterhead. She pivoted to the offensive. And what happens when the papers run with this? Millionaire shelters a maid who lied. When donors walk, when our foundation's projects stall, you think your redemption pays invoices? He held her gaze. I think redemption rewrites legacies. She scoffed. Poetry. You always wanted. To be the hero in a story Grace made too messy to tell? Her chin lifted. Well, I will not play the villain. Then stop auditioning, he said. The intercom crackled again. Cole's voice tight. Mr. Whitmore, we've got movement. At the East Service Gate, a black SUV just triggered the sensor, and a second vehicle is approaching behind it. Also, you'll want to see this. The driver handed me a court envelope addressed to Evelyn Carter. Evelyn stepped into the hall with Emily, startled by the alarm tone in Cole's words. Ms. Alvarez followed, already on her phone with dispatch, calm but urgent. Lydia arrived from the foyer, breathless, as if fate had dragged everyone to one narrow doorway at the same time. Richard took the envelope from Cole. The seal bore the imprint of Greenville County. He tore it open. Inside was a petition, thin paper, heavy consequence. Thomas Givens had filed for establishment of paternity and temporary custody review, claiming he was the child's father and that the mother was hiding the minor in an unsafe environment. Evelyn's face drained of color. "He left us," she whispered. "He left before Emily was born. He never came back." Margaret's relief came like a smile she tried to swallow. At last, proof this is not our problem. But Lydia's eyes sharpened, and Ms. Alvarez lifted a hand. "A petition is not proof," the social worker said. "It's a claim, and it will be investigated." Richard stared at the signature, Thomas Givens, the same ghost Evelyn had named in block 2. The air in the hallway thinned as engines hummed outside, patients idling in black paint and tinted glass. He reached for Evelyn's shoulder. "We are not handing over this child to anyone who walks in with paper and a story." Before anyone could answer, the East Gate alarm chimed again, closer, louder. Cole's radio squawked, "Sir, the SUV doors just opened. 2 men in suits, 1 woman with a clipboard, and now a 4th person, male, mid-40s, beard, matches the ID photo on the petition." Evelyn's breath broke. Emily looked up, suddenly small and solemn, fingers searching for her bracelet. Richard lifted his chin, the millionaire choosing a side. "Cole," he said, voice steady, "keep that gate locked. Ms. Alvarez, you'll walk with me. We'll meet them together at the courtyard. Lydia, stay with Evelyn and the child." He took 1 step toward the door, and his phone buzzed in his hand. A new text from the banker on Broad Street. "Mr. Whitmore, we found an additional item at the back of the box, a hospital footprint card marked Emmeline June Whitmore. Looks like it slid behind the lining. Do you want us to hold it for you?" Richard closed his eyes for the span of a heartbeat. When he opened them, the world had sharper edges. "Time to end this," he said. He turned the knob just as the black SUV rolled fully into view beyond the fountain, door swinging open, family secrets rushing the daylight like a storm over the marsh. And before anyone could claim the child, a voice from the courtyard called his name. The one person whose arrival could set the truth ablaze. "Richard." The voice echoed through the Whitmore courtyard like thunder over Charleston Bay. Every head turned toward the fountain, where a man stepped forward from the black SUV, flanked by 2 suited companions. He was broad-shouldered, with a trimmed beard streaked in gray, his eyes burning with a mixture of defiance and entitlement. It was Thomas Givens. Evelyn's breath hitched, as if her lungs had turned to stone. "No," she whispered, clutching Emily so tightly the child whimpered. "You don't get to come back now." Richard's stride slowed, his gaze sweeping the scene. Behind Thomas, the DSS representative adjusted her clipboard, already uneasy. Margaret stood in the doorway, her lips curled into a predator's smile, watching her husband's world fracture by the second. Thomas raised a set of papers high into the sticky Carolina air. "I have the petition. I am the father of that child, and I've come to claim my rights." Evelyn's knees trembled. "Rights?" she snapped, finding her voice. "You forfeited every right the day you abandoned me. The day you left us to starve." The DSS worker, Ms. Alvarez, stepped forward. "Mr. Givens, until we verify documents and establish paternity legally, no custody transfer can take place." But Thomas wasn't deterred. He walked closer, his boots crunching gravel. "Don't play games. This child deserves a proper life, a real father, not a maid who hides in the shadows of millionaires." He cast a smug glance toward Richard. "And maybe that's why you've been protecting her, Whitmore. Maybe she's yours." The accusation sliced the courtyard in half. Gasps escaped from the staff gathered at the edges, Delilah clutching her apron tighter. Margaret's eyes narrowed in sudden suspicion. Evelyn shook her head violently, but the poison was already loose. Richard didn't flinch. "Careful with your words, Givens," he warned, his voice cold steel. Thomas smirked. "Why? Did I strike too close?" He looked at Evelyn. "Tell them, Evie. Tell them about those nights in Greenville, or are you saving that story for sympathy?" "A point?" Evelyn's face flushed with rage and shame. "You don't get to twist history. You were gone before Emily ever took her first breath, and you know it." The social worker lifted her clipboard like a shield. "Everyone, stop. This child does not deserve a public tug-of-war. We will handle this properly." But Thomas leaned down, his voice dropping into a growl only Evelyn and Richard could hear. "Or we settle it the way men do. One check, one signature, and she's out of your life, Evelyn. You think I came for love? No. I came because now I know she's worth something, because of this family's money." Richard's jaw tightened. "So that's it. You don't want the girl. You want the Whitmore fortune tied to her." Thomas's grin spread, wolfish. "Exactly. And I'll burn down every secret this family holds until I get it." Inside the mansion, Lydia pressed a hand against her heart as she listened from the window. She whispered to Delilah, "This is what Grace feared, that vultures would circle if the truth ever saw daylight." She pulled another document from her folder, knuckles white. "But Grace didn't leave her child unguarded. There's more proof," Delilah urged. "Then give it to him now, before Margaret spins this any darker." Back in the courtyard, Evelyn's fury cracked through her fear. "You don't want her, you never wanted her, you just want leverage. Well, Thomas, hear me now. You will never take Emily from me, never." Emily, confused and frightened, buried her face against her mother's chest. Richard stepped closer, his frame towering over Thomas. "If you think you can bully your way into this house, you've miscalculated. DSS will have their process, and until then, you don't set one foot past this gate." Thomas chuckled, low and mocking. "Funny, coming from you, because from where I stand, Whitmore, you're terrified. Terrified that this child might carry your bloodline instead of mine." The words hit Margaret like a dart. She turned sharply to her husband. "Richard, is that possible? Did you—" Richard's eyes blazed, not at the question, but at the venom behind it. "No, this is not about me. This is about Emily, and about a man who abandoned her, crawling back for money." Thomas's smile faltered, if only for a second. But then he held the petition higher, his voice booming across the property. "The court will hear me, and when they do, Evelyn, you'll be the one cast aside, a maid against a father. Guess who they'll believe?" The social worker finally stepped between them, her tone sharp. "Enough! This is no longer a conversation. Mr. Givens, we'll investigate your claim, but until then, you are not authorized to remove the child. Do you understand me?" Thomas's jaw clenched, his pride forced to swallow the moment. "This isn't over," he spat. He pointed at Evelyn. "You hear me? I'm coming back with proof, and when I do, your little secret won't save you." He turned, storming back, toward the SUV. The suited men followed, but not before one of them slipped Margaret a discreet nod. Richard caught it, and his stomach turned cold. His wife was no bystander. She was an accomplice. As the black SUV roared out of the driveway, Evelyn collapsed to her knees, Emily wrapped tightly in her arms. Tears blurred her vision. "He can't take her, Mr. Whitmore. He can't." Richard knelt beside her, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. "He won't, not while I breathe." But above them, Margaret stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Behind her eyes flickered a dangerous calculation, a plan forming in the shadows. And as night fell over Charleston, the battle lines had been drawn, not only between Evelyn and Thomas, but within the Whitmore household itself. The next move would either protect Emily forever or destroy everything. The night pressed down heavy over the Whitmore estate, the Spanish moss swaying in the low country breeze like whispers of judgment. Inside the mansion, tension thickened with every tick of the antique grandfather clock. Evelyn sat at the edge of Emily's cot in the laundry room, stroking her daughter's hair, humming that fragile lullaby to keep nightmares away. But her own nightmares marched louder than the song, Thomas's threats, Margaret's venom, and the looming shadow of courts and custody battles. Meanwhile, Richard poured a glass of bourbon in his study, but the drink tasted like ash. He paced. Beneath oil portraits of Whitmore patriarchs, men carved in cold dignity, all granite eyes and rigid jaws. He could almost hear them sneer, "A Whitmore does not bend for servants. A Whitmore does not blur the bloodline." Yet the voices that haunted him most weren't painted on canvas. They belonged to his sister Grace. He unfolded her letter again, fingers brushing her words. "If my child cannot be with me, she should be with Evelyn Carter, not for money, for love." Grace had never begged him for anything in her life. But here, it was, ink on paper, her plea from beyond the grave. Lydia entered quietly, holding another piece of Grace's hidden past. "There's more, Richard," she said, laying a small journal on his desk. "She left this with me when she was afraid the family would disown her. She asked me to keep it until the day you were ready to face her truth." Richard hesitated. Before opening the worn leather cover, the handwriting leapt out, messy and alive. Grace wrote of falling in love with a man who wasn't accepted by the Whitmore name. She wrote of her pregnancy, the joy of a daughter, and her fear that Margaret, yes, Margaret, would never allow a child like Emily into the family. Margaret believes legacy must be flawless, but life, Richard, is beautiful because it isn't. His heart clenched. He remembered arguments with Margaret years ago, when she insisted they support policies in the foundation that weed out liabilities. He had thought she meant financial risks. Now he realized she meant people. In the East Wing, Margaret was on the phone again, her voice sharp as glass. "Yes, Harrison, I have leverage. The courts will side with Thomas if we frame Evelyn as unstable. All we need is one misstep, one moment caught on camera. Make sure Palmetto Security has the tapes lined up. If the maid falters, if that child has a tantrum in public, we'll prove she's unfit. The donors will thank us for protecting the Whitmore name." She ended the call and stared out the window, her reflection warped in the glass. She had spent years climbing into Charleston's elite, curating luncheons, draping pearls across causes. She would not watch it all collapse under the weight of one Maid's secret and a child who carried imperfection like a brand. Her plan was simple. Let Thomas claim paternity. Let the courts strip Emily from Evelyn. The Whitmore's hands would remain clean, and Margaret would stand as the woman who ensured order. But she underestimated Richard's growing resolve. At dawn, Richard summoned Evelyn, Lydia, and Ms. Alvarez to the study. The child still slept. Her small hand curled around the silver bracelet like it was her anchor to the world. "I won't lie to you," Richard began, voice steady. "Thomas has filed a petition. Margaret is feeding it, and the courts will consider it because they see wealth and power before they see truth. But Grace left more than a memory. She left documents, letters, and names, and I intend to use every piece of it." He pulled out the notarized guardianship letter and set it on the desk. "Evelyn, Grace trusted you above everyone else, including me. This gives you standing." Evelyn's eyes welled with tears. "But will they believe it? Against him?" "They will," Lydia said firmly, "because Grace wasn't reckless. She made sure her wishes were recorded, and because we'll fight for it together." Ms. Alvarez nodded, scribbling notes. "I'll escalate this with the family court. It's not definitive, but it's a strong start. What we need now is testimony, witnesses to Grace's intent." Richard's gaze hardened. "And we'll find them. Pearl at the diner, the nurse at Roper who signed the birth card, anyone who knew the truth." Evelyn swallowed hard. hope and fear colliding in her chest. But even as they planned, Margaret moved her pieces. That same morning, she invited Thomas into a discreet meeting at a downtown hotel. She slid a folder across the table, surveillance stills of Evelyn sneaking Emily into the mansion, blurry but incriminating. "The optics are yours to use," she told him. "Portray her as deceptive, desperate. I'll handle the donors. You handle the courts. Together we bury the maid's claim." Thomas smirked, pocketing the photos. "And what do you get?" Margaret's lips curved. "A family name unsullied and a husband who owes me once again." But Thomas didn't see the flicker of calculation in her eyes. Margaret wasn't planning to share control. She was planning to own the narrative entirely. That night, Evelyn awoke to find Emily's cot empty. Panic gripped her as she rushed down the corridor. She found the child near the foyer, barefoot, holding the bracelet high toward the portraits on the wall. "Mommy," Emily said softly, "she looks like me." Evelyn followed her gaze. It was Grace's portrait. Wild hair, gentle smile, eyes that mirrored Emily's. Tears blurred Evelyn's vision. "Yes, baby, she was brave, just like you." Richard, drawn by the commotion, stopped in the doorway. He saw Emily under the portrait of his sister and felt something click into place. Grace wasn't gone. She was here, living, breathing in this child. He knelt, his voice breaking. "Emily, you are family, whether the courts say it or not." Evelyn's heart thundered. For the first time since Grace's death, Richard Whitmore chose love over legacy. But even as hope flickered, the storm gathered strength. Margaret's betrayal and Thomas's greed were converging. And soon, Evelyn and Emily would face a trial, not in a courtroom, but in the very heart of the Whitmore empire. The courthouse in downtown Charleston loomed like a fortress, its columns rising against the morning sky with the authority of centuries. By the time Evelyn and Richard arrived, escorted by Lydia and Ms. Alvarez, whispers already floated along the marble corridors. Reporters leaned over the railing, scribbling notes about the Whitmore scandal. A millionaire, a maid, and a child whose existence threatened to redraw the map of a dynasty. Inside courtroom 3B, oak benches creaked as spectators filled. Every row, Margaret sat front and center, pearls gleaming, her posture a portrait of icy dignity. At her side, Thomas adjusted his tie, the smug curve of his mouth betraying the confidence of a man who believed money and manipulation could bend truth to his favor. His attorney stacked papers high, photographs, petitions, a polished narrative, ready to dismantle Evelyn's claim. Evelyn clutched Emily's hand as they walked toward their table. The little girl's bracelet glimmered beneath the fluorescent lights. "Mommy," she whispered, "why are so many people staring?" "Because they've never seen courage before," Evelyn replied softly, though her stomach trembled with dread. Richard, usually composed like a marble statue, adjusted his cufflinks too many times. He leaned toward Evelyn. "No matter what's said today, you're not alone. Grace wanted this. She wanted you." Lydia set her leather folder on the table, her eyes steady. "We'll speak when the time is right." The judge, stern and weathered by decades of family disputes, entered with the weight of authority. This hearing concerns the custody petition filed by Mr. Thomas Givens against Ms. Evelyn Carter. We will hear testimony, examine evidence, and determine interim guardianship of the minor child, Emily Carter. His gavel struck. "Proceed." Thomas's attorney rose first, voice smooth as honey. "Your Honor, this case is about truth. My client, Mr. Givens, is the biological father of Emily Carter. For years, Ms. Carter has concealed the child, depriving her of paternal care. She has hidden Emily in unsafe conditions, even within an employer's home, without disclosure, without oversight. This is a matter of negligence and deception." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Margaret allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Then Evelyn's attorney, a woman recommended by Ms. Alvarez, stood. "Your Honor, this is not a case of negligence. This is a case of survival. My client, Ms. Carter, has raised Emily alone since the day she was born. Mr. Givens abandoned both mother and child long before birth. Only now, upon discovering the Whitmore connection, does he appear, motivated not by love, but by money. We have documentation that supports not only Evelyn's guardianship, but also the wishes of the late Grace Whitmore, Richard Whitmore's sister, who entrusted her child's well-being to Ms. Carter." The courtroom gasped. Margaret's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. Thomas scowled. The judge leaned forward. "We will need to see this documentation." Lydia rose with quiet strength, producing the notarized letter and Grace's journal. "Your Honor, I was Grace Whitmore's nanny. I witnessed her struggles, her fears, and her love for her daughter. She made me promise to protect Evelyn should this day ever come. Here is her signature, her intent, and the guardianship letter naming Evelyn Carter as custodian." The judge examined the documents, brow furrowing. "This is highly unusual." Thomas jumped to his feet. "Objection. This is hearsay from a disgruntled ex-employee. We demand genetic testing." The judge rapped the gavel. "You will have your turn, Mr. Givens." Then came the photographs. Thomas's attorney slammed them onto the projector screen. Grainy stills of Evelyn sneaking Emily into the mansion, carrying her through side doors at night. "Your Honor, this is proof of deception," the attorney declared. "This maid created a secret life within the Whitmore estate. Is this the behavior of a fit guardian?" Gasps filled the room again. Evelyn's cheeks burned. Emily whimpered, hiding her face against her mother's arm, before despair could sink in. Richard rose. His voice cut across the courtroom, low but thunderous. "If Evelyn Carter is guilty of anything, it is of protecting her child against a world that would have torn them apart. Those photographs don't show deception, they show survival. She worked in my home with dignity and dedication, and when no one else cared for Emily, she sacrificed everything to keep her safe. That is not unfit parenting. That is love." Margaret hissed from her seat. "Sit down, Richard." But he didn't waver. The judge regarded him carefully. "Mr. Whitmore, are you testifying under oath?" Richard nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I will testify that my sister Grace entrusted Evelyn Carter with the guardianship of her child. I will testify that Thomas Givens abandoned them, and I will testify that Evelyn Carter has shown more honor than most who bear the Whitmore name." The words landed like cannon fire. Margaret's face drained of color. Thomas clenched his jaw. Then came the unexpected twist. As the judge reviewed the documents, the bailiff entered the courtroom holding an envelope. "Your Honor, this was delivered to the clerk's office this morning. It bears the seal of Roper St. Francis Hospital." The judge opened it, eyebrows lifting. Inside was a hospital footprint card dated June 12th, the name Emmeline June Whitmore written in Grace's hand. The footprint matched the size and time of Emily's birth certificate. Gasps rippled again, louder this time. Evelyn's tears fell. "Really?" Lydia clasped her hands in prayer. Richard closed his eyes, overwhelmed. The judge tapped the document against his bench, visibly moved. "This evidence suggests the child was not merely Evelyn Carter's responsibility. It suggests direct lineage to the Whitmore family." Margaret's voice cracked. "No, this cannot, this must not." But the judge silenced her with a gavel strike. "The court will recess until DNA confirmation is filed. Until then, interim guardianship remains with Miss Carter. Mr. Givens's petition for immediate custody is denied." Evelyn broke into sobs, clutching Emily, whispering, "We did it, baby. We're safe for now." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice trembling. Grace's truth is finally speaking. Yet as relief washed over them, Margaret slipped from the courtroom unnoticed, her phone already in hand. Her whisper was cold as winter. "If the courts won't bury Evelyn, I will. There are other ways to silence secrets. And while Evelyn embraced her daughter in fragile victory, the storm beyond the courthouse walls grew darker because Margaret Whitmore had just chosen war. The rain came in bands, sweeping over the marshes and slapping against the tall windows of the Whitmore estate until the glass trembled like a warning. Charleston thunder rolled low and steady as if the sky were rehearsing a verdict no one wanted to hear. Inside, the house had been stripped down to whispers and watchful eyes. The millionaire had ordered the staff to rest, but no one truly slept. Not the maid, not the nanny, not the man who had finally chosen love over reputation. In the laundry room, Evelyn sat beside Emily's cot, reading by the glow of a battery lantern while the storm gnawed at the power lines. Emily's bracelet, crescent and palmetto, caught the weak light each time the child turned in her sleep. "Almost done, sunshine," Evelyn murmured, finishing the last page of a story about brave girls and honest hearts. Emily smiled, then winced, one hand drifting to her chest. "Does it hurt, baby?" Evelyn whispered. Emily nodded, small and solemn. A thin sheen of sweat had gathered at her hairline. Evelyn pressed her palm to her daughter's forehead, then to the pulse at her neck. The beat fluttered too fast. She remembered the pediatrician's cautions about heart murmurs common in Down syndrome. Watch for fatigue. Watch for shortness of breath. Don't wait too long. Lightning stitched the sky. The lights flickered, then died. The mansion exhaled into darkness. Across the hall, Lydia stepped out with a flashlight. "Power's down to the whole block," she said softly. "Cole's calling the utility. How is she?" "Not right," Evelyn said, calm, wrapped around panic. Her breathing's shallow. "We need Roper St. Francis, now." Before they could move, the intercom crackled through the generator's sputter, Cole's voice tight. "Mr. Whitmore, we've got movement at the East Service Gate. 2 private security cars. They're claiming a wellness extraction. Approved by council." Evelyn's stomach turned to stone. "Extraction?" Lydia's jaw set. "That's not DSS protocol. That's a stunt." In the study, Richard lifted the receiver. "Who authorized this?" A man's voice, smooth, rehearsed, came through from the gate. "Palmetto Private Security on behalf of Mrs. Whitmore. We're here to escort the minor to a pediatric observation facility until legal matters are settled." Richard stared at the dark window where rain chased itself into rivulets. "There is no order," he said. "There is a safety plan on file with DSS. Turn your vehicles around." "Sir," the voice said, silk over steel, "we have council letters. It's safer if you cooperate." Richard didn't raise his voice. "You're trespassing on Whitmore property. The gate stays locked." He hung up and headed for the laundry. Wing! He found Evelyn pulling on a raincoat around Emily, who shivered, lips paling at the edges. Delilah was already there with towels and a thermos. "Baby's cold," she murmured, pressing warm cloths to Emily's hands. "Storms make old houses cruel." Evelyn met Richard's eyes. "She needs a hospital." "We're going," he said. "Now!" They had just reached the mudroom when Margaret appeared, umbrella in one hand, phone in the other, pearls winking in the lantern light. "Where are you taking her?" she asked, voice sugar-laced with arsenic. "To a doctor," Evelyn said. "Emily's not well." Margaret's smile sharpened. "Then we'll do it properly. The cars at the East Gate will transfer her to Palmetto Pediatrics, a secure facility that accepts emergency custody holds in contested cases. Far better optics than a maid sprinting through the night with a child who doesn't legally belong. To her, she belongs to me, Evelyn answered, and to the truth. Richard stepped forward. "Call off the cars, Margaret." She didn't blink. "Call off your fantasy, Richard. You've let family secrets make you sentimental." She angled her phone so the blue light washed her cheekbones. "Or do we want tomorrow's headlines to read, 'Millionaire obstructs child safety transfer'?" "Obstruct this," Delilah muttered, and killed the mudroom light with a snap. Darkness folded around them, broken only by the lantern's faint circle and lightning firing the windows white. Emily whimpered. That settled everything. Evelyn lifted her daughter and looked at Richard. He nodded once, the smallest, fiercest vow. "Lydia," he said, "take the service staircase with them. I'll stall the gate and shut down the front drive." They split like water finding seams in rock. Lydia led Evelyn through a narrow passage that smelled of lemon oil and old cotton, down a tight spiral to a door that few remembered. It opened onto a hedged path along the brick. Rain soaked them instantly. Wind turned umbrellas into useless flags. Evelyn clutched Emily against her chest, counting breaths, matching them with the rhythm of her own heart. Behind them, Cole stepped into the entry with Richard, shouldering a heavy beam into place. "That'll delay them," Cole said. "The East Gate's motor is jammed. But we've got a bigger problem. Someone supplied Palmetto with internal maps. They're moving toward the North Hedge cut-through." "Who?" Richard asked, though. He knew. Thunder answered for him. They rounded the hedge and almost collided with a figure in a raincoat, Thomas Givens. He lifted his hands in a mockery of surrender. "Easy," he said, yelling over the wind. "Let me take her. I'll carry her to the car. She needs help." "Get out of the way," Lydia warned, putting herself between him and the child. Thomas took one step closer. "Look at her lips," he said, voice softening just enough to fool anyone who didn't know him. "She's cyanotic. I worked heavy. Machinery, Evelyn. I know what an oxygen drop looks like. She needs a hospital. Now." Evelyn's grip tightened. "Then move." He moved, deliberately left, cutting off the path. Two Palmetto men materialized from the rain behind him, slickers shining. "We'll take the minor," one said, extending gloved hands. "Ma'am, this is for her safety." "Safety?" Evelyn's voice was low thunder. "You're here because a betrayal paid for your gas. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Rain, breath, conscience." Then a piercing whistle shrieked from the house, the back alley alarm. Cole had tripped it, floodlights blazed, illuminating the hedges and the stone walk like midday. The two men hesitated, exposed. "Now," Lydia said, grabbing Evelyn's elbow. They burst past, skirts slapping, shoes sinking into sodden grass, Emily's small face pressed into her mother's shoulder. The Palmetto men lunged, then stalled as yard lights snapped and cameras pivoted, their restraint suddenly rehearsed for the record. From the main drive, Richard shouted, "The North Hedge gate is open! Go!" Behind him, Margaret's voice carried, thin and furious, "Do not let that woman leave the property with that child, but storms have their own loyalties." The wind hurled a curtain of water across the drive, and in that shifting veil, the three women slipped out into the street, where Lydia's old sedan idled, engine coughing. They tumbled inside. Evelyn cradled Emily across her lap as Lydia threw the car into gear. "Seatbelts," Lydia said, hands white on the wheel. "Hold on." They fishtailed onto the slick road, wipers useless against rain that fell in sheets. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, police maybe, ambulance maybe, the sound of consequences gaining. Lydia took a hard right past Pearl's diner, all neon drowned, then shot toward Roper St. Francis like muscle memory was steering. In the back seat, Evelyn kept her voice level. "Stay with me, sunshine. In for 4, out for 4. She breathed with Emily, a metronome of love. The child matched her, lips slowly pinking at the edges. "That's it," Evelyn whispered, tears mixing with rain she hadn't wiped from her face. "That's my brave girl." They skidded under the ER canopy, brakes screaming. Orderlies rushed out with a gurney. "Chest pain, Downs," Lydia rattled off. "Breathing shallow, cyanotic episode, braceleted minor with possible Whitmore family. Tie. Charleston is a small town wrapped in a city's clothes." The orderlies didn't blink at the name. Inside, fluorescent light erased the storm. Nurses clipped a pulse oximeter to Emily's finger, fitted a small cannula under her nose, murmured soft reassurances only nurses have learned to pronounce like prayers. Evelyn clung to the gurney rail until a triage nurse touched her arm. "We'll take care of her, Mama. You breathe too." The automatic doors swished. Richard strode in, soaked to the bone. Ms. Alvarez beside him, hair plastered to her cheeks, cold trailing with a split lip he refused to explain. Margaret entered seconds later, immaculate despite the storm, as if the rain had agreed not to touch her. A pediatric cardiologist appeared, calm and brisk. "We see this," she said. "Many children with trisomy 21 have small defects that can flare under stress. We'll run an echo labs. She's stable for now." "Doctor," Margaret cut in, "this child may be in a custody dispute. You'll need authorization from the legal guardian before any invasive—" "Then you'll be speaking to Ms. Carter," Ms. Alvarez said, flashing her badge with the finality of a gavel. "Interim guardianship stands." The doctor nodded. "One consent signature, then." She held out the clipboard to Evelyn. Evelyn's hand shook as she signed, the pen scratching like a match in the quiet. From down the corridor, a lab tech hurried over, clutching a plastic envelope sealed with an official stamp. "Delivery for Mr. Whitmore," she said, breathless. "DNA rush, court-ordered panel, chain of custody intact. It came through even with the storm." The envelope looked deceptively light. Family secrets sometimes arrive that way, featherweight and world-breaking. Richard accepted it without ceremony, thumbs worrying the edges as if stalling could keep history from deciding itself. "Don't," Margaret said, voice low. "Not here." "Exactly here," Lydia answered, "because the truth belongs where the child is." Emily's monitor chirped in steady time, soft green numbers marching, oxygen rising. Evelyn kissed her daughter's forehead. "We're right here, baby," she whispered. "All of us." Richard slid a finger under the seal and opened the envelope. Papers whispered, lines of numbers and words stacked like courthouse steps. He scanned, blinked, scanned again. The storm outside rattled the glass, as if trying to read over his shoulder. He lifted his eyes to Evelyn, to Emily, to Margaret, to the nurse who'd paused with a blood pressure cuff in midair, to Ms. Alvarez, pen hovering over a form, to Lydia, hands clasped as if holding a past and a future together by prayer alone. His voice was quiet when it came, but it carried to every ear, to every wound, to every ledger that ever miscounted love. "The test is conclusive," he said. "Emily is—" The ER doors burst open behind him. Thomas Givens pushed through with 2 officers and a sheaf of damp papers, triumphant and breathless. "Hold everything!" he shouted. "By order of Greenville County, temporary custody." Hearing moved to emergency session at dawn. "She doesn't leave this hospital without me." The cardiologist stepped forward, unruffled. "She doesn't leave this hospital without me," she said. "She's scheduled for an urgent echo at first light. Anyone who interferes with medicine." Sirens wailed again, closer, stacking against the windows like a second storm. The clock above the nurse's station tipped toward midnight. The paper trembled in Richard's hand. The next sentence would redraw the map of the Whitmore name, of a maid's courage, of a nanny's promise. It would end one betrayal and begin a redemption. He took a breath, and just as he opened his mouth to finish the sentence, the hospital lights flickered, the monitors hiccuped, and a code announcement blared down the hall, pulling every eye, every heartbeat, and every last certainty toward the edge of morning. The code announcement rattled the ER like a gunshot. In a cathedral, nurses sprinted down the corridor, wheels of gurneys screeching, voices clipped with urgency. For one suspended moment, everyone froze. Evelyn clutching Emily's hand, Richard still holding the DNA report, Margaret calculating in the shadows, Thomas brandishing his papers like a weapon. But then the monitors beside Emily steadied, their green numbers climbing back into rhythm. The cardiologist hurried in, calm but commanding. "False alarm, wrong bay. This child is stable, but she needs an echo at sunrise. No transfers, no disruptions." Relief swept through the room like a tide. Evelyn bent over Emily, tears wetting her daughter's hair. "You're safe, baby. You're safe." Richard exhaled, then lifted the paper again. The storm outside quieted, as if nature itself were listening. "The test," he said firmly, "is conclusive. Emily is Grace Whitmore's daughter. She is my niece." The truth fell heavy, undeniable. Evelyn covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Lydia closed her eyes in prayerful thanks. Delilah, who had slipped in unseen, whispered, "Sunshine's come home." Margaret staggered back as though struck. "No, this ruins everything, our reputation, our foundation." Richard cut her off. "It saves everything, because without truth, the Whitmore name is a lie." Grace asked Evelyn to protect Emily, and she did. Better than any of us could, better than you ever wanted. His gaze sharpened. "This family doesn't belong to you, Margaret, not anymore." Thomas shoved forward, waving his petition. "Paper trumps sentiment. The court meets at dawn." But Ms. Alvarez stepped between them, badge raised. "Not anymore. With this DNA result and the guardianship letter, custody shifts. Evelyn Carter remains guardian until permanent orders are filed. Your petition, Mr. Givens, is moot." The officers flanking Thomas hesitated, then took him by the elbows. "Sir, you'll need to return for your scheduled hearing. Tonight, you're done here," Thomas cursed, his voice breaking under years of bitterness. "She could have been mine. She should have been mine." "No," Evelyn said, rising with Emily in her arms. Her voice carried the strength of storms and lullabies. "She was always meant to be loved, not owned. And love chose me." At dawn, sunlight pierced the storm clouds, flooding the hospital room in gold. Emily stirred awake, eyes brighter, color restored. She reached for her bracelet, then for Richard's hand. "Uncle?" she whispered shyly, as if testing the word. He swallowed hard, tears glinting in eyes that had been dry for decades. "Yes, Sunshine. Uncle." Evelyn looked at him, her own eyes shimmering. "She has a family now, not in money." "In truth," Richard nodded. "In redemption." Margaret, stripped of her power, left the room in silence, pearls dim under the morning light. She vanished down the corridor like a ghost retreating into irrelevance. Lydia touched Evelyn's shoulder. "Grace would be proud. You carried her promise all the way here." Evelyn pressed her forehead to her daughter's. "We carried each other." And in that room, for the first time in years, the Whitmore name meant not marble, not money, not pride, but love. I'm John Parker. And remember, every story hides a truth. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments from which city or country you're listening. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a like. It helps us reach more people who need stories of love, betrayal, and redemption. Because sometimes the greatest fortune isn't in the millionaire's vault. It's in the courage of a mother who refuses to let go.